Welcome back. This is part 7 of our Baldur's Gate 3 class tier list. We're talking about the Sorcerer. Let's dive into it. Sorcerers! I'm so excited about this one, guys. This is where we start talking about our arcane casters, because the only classes we have left are Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. The 3 arcane casters. And I think it's going to be really fun. We're just going to focus, hopefully do a deep dive on arcane spells and the crazy and awesome things that you can do with them when you combine them with certain class features. Let's start, as we always do, with base stats and proficiencies. For hit points, sorcerers have the 1d6 hit point progression. That is the low hit point progression. It's the lowest in the game. It's pretty bad. They get, for saving throws, they get Constitution and Charisma. Now, Charisma, just forget about it. It's practically useless, but Constitution is so important for casters. And we've been over this before, but the potency of your spells for many of the very powerful spells is determined by your ability to maintain concentration. And to maintain concentration, you have to make a Constitution saving throw. So having proficiency in Constitution saving throws as a caster is so crucial. And sorcerers get it. Unlike the Warlock and the Wizard, they don't have to invest like a feat or anything to get this. They just get it at level 1 when they pick their class. And that is so great. Awesome saving throws as far as I'm concerned, even though Charisma just isn't doing anything. For weapon and armor proficiencies, sorcerers get no armor proficiency. And then for weapons, they get proficiency in dagger, quarterstaff, and light crossbow. So that means basically no weapons also. You're not going to be counting on weapons as a sorcerer, because you will have the other feature, the very first feature I want to discuss, which is cantrips and spells. Now, before getting to that, sorcerers do pick their subclass at level 1. They're like the cleric in that way. And in early access, we have 2 subclasses, Wild Mage and Draconic Bloodline. But as we did with the cleric, I'm going to cover all of the base class features first, and then we'll return to level 1 to discuss the subclasses. I'm just drawing that to your attention for now. For the base class sorcerer, the feature that you get at level 1 is your spell casting, and that's it. So let's look at it now. You get to pick 4 cantrips and 2 level 1 spells, and then your spell casts per day are the same as a full caster like a wizard or a cleric. Now, 2 level 1 spells known is a very low amount, as we will see. And this kind of defines the sorcerer's niche, its mechanical niche, which is that it has a very limited spell selection. But later, at level 2, it's going to get a feature called Metamagic, which allows you to alter the small pool of spells that you do have in different ways to make them more adaptable, or at least that's the idea. Practically, what actually happens with the sorcerer is you are the far more specialized arcane caster. Wizards are the broader, more generalized casters that can find that right spell for every situation. Sorcerers aren't like that. Their limited number of spells means you want to carefully curate your spell list and build around it to maximize the few spells that you have. So you will often be doing really specialized things as a sorcerer. Alright, now let's get into the spells. I said that sorcerers don't need weapon proficiencies because they have cantrips. And we haven't really discussed this in much detail, so let's do it now. Cantrips are at-will spells. You can cast them without a spell slot, so they don't require any special resource. And a lot of them are kind of meant to be replacements for a standard weapon attack. Let's look at an example here, Firebolt. Firebolt does 1d10 fire damage. It's a ranged attack. You make an attack roll the same way as if you were firing a bow or swinging a sword, only you do not use your strength or dexterity on the attack roll, but you use your spellcasting attribute, which for sorcerers is charisma. So in our case, if we cast Firebolt, we make a ranged attack roll, and we add our proficiency bonus plus our charisma modifier to the attack roll, and if the attack hits, it does 1d10 fire damage. Now, with bows and swords, you also add your attack attribute modifier to your damage, but that does not happen with attack cantrips. What does this mean? Most attack cantrips will do less damage than weapon attacks because you don't add that extra, 3 to 5 damage onto your damage roll. So they're slightly worse options. But they will scale as you level. They usually scale in a way that matches a fighter's extra attack progression, where you start adding damage dice. So at level 5, Firebolt will do 2d10 fire damage, with one exception, which is the Warlock. You're never meant to be a striker just because you have Firebolt and it scales naturally with levels. It just means that wizards aren't punished as badly when they don't have spell slots left, or if you don't want to use the spell slot in a fight, you're saving it for later. There are things that they can do. They're not completely useless like they were in other editions of the game. Now, these cantrips that are meant to replace weapon attacks come in two varieties. There are what I call attack cantrips, which are like Firebolt. They function with an attack roll. Then there are save cantrips, like Poison Spray, for example. Poison Spray does not make an attack roll. Rather, enemies must make a saving throw to resist it. In the case of Poison Spray, a Constitution saving throw. Now, how the math works between these two types is that save cantrips are always worse. They are less accurate, and they do less damage. Even if the damage dice is higher. For example, with Poison Spray, you do 1d12 damage compared to 1d10 from Firebolt, 1d8 from Ray of Frost, but you still do less damage. Why? Because on attack rolls, you can crit if you roll a 20. You can never crit when someone's making a saving throw. That's just not how it works. In higher level spells, saving throw damage spells make up for the fact that they don't crit by the fact that they still do damage even on a miss. So if enemies succeed their saving throw, they will typically still do damage. It'll just be half of their damage. But that is not the case with cantrips. So save cantrips are just worse. If you see a cantrip that requires a saving throw and does damage, basically just ignore it. They're not good. Now let's talk about the attack cantrips that I think are the best. It isn't Firebolt. The best attack cantrip, I think, by far, is Ray of Frost. Ray of Frost does 1d8 cold damage, and if it hits, the target has 3 meters, that's 2 movement units, 10 feet if you do feet, reduced on their movement speed on their next turn. So that's kind of nice. You can also sometimes freeze watery surfaces with this, in which case the enemies must make a saving throw or go prone, which reduces even more movement. The big reason, that's all nice, those are nice effects, because there's no saving throw to resist the movement speed reduction, by the way. But the really big reason that Ray of Frost is the best, in my opinion, is that it does cold damage. And you can double cold damage against wet targets, and it's really that simple. It just does the most damage of all the cantrips, because even though it's 1d8, Firebolt is 1d10, you're going to do more damage when you can double it against wet targets, which will be often if you spam Create Water like I do. So, yep, I think Ray of Frost is hands down the best cantrip. Shocking Grasp does the same amount of damage in lightning damage. And it also has an interesting effect. When you hit a target, they can't take reactions, and you have advantage when attacking targets that are wearing metal armor. That's really good. But it is a melee attack, whereas Ray of Frost is a ranged attack, so I do prefer Ray of Frost over Shocking Grasp, but Shocking Grasp is also good. Actually, I should take Shocking Grasp here. Another really good attack cantrip is this one, Chill Touch. It does necrotic damage, which you can't multiply with, a forced vulnerability, so it's less damage in general. However, it has this really awesome effect where when you hit a target with it, they cannot regain hit points on their next turn. They can't heal. So against some enemies that are dependent on healing, Chill Touch gets insane efficiency. There's only one fight I can think of in early access right now where this is super useful, and that's against a certain fire elemental in a little lava area. It it heals a lot, and Chill Touch can cancel its healing. But I fully expect there to be other enemies in the game that are going to abuse healing, and Chill Touch is their direct counter. If any of you guys have played Solasta, which you should, it's a fantastic game. One of the early bosses in Solasta spams healing a lot, and Chill Touch shuts her down. So yeah, I always recommend taking Ray of Frost and Chill Touch on every arcane caster that gets cantrips. The last cantrip I want to talk about for the Sorcerer is Blade Ward. Blade Ward gives you resistance to physical damage, that's bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, just like the Barbarian gets when they rage. Sadly, it takes an action to cast, and you only get the resistance for 2 turns. That means if you want to have resistance against physical damage up constantly, you need to sacrifice half of your turns. Every other turn just needs to be used on Blade Ward. Is that a good trade in general? Not really. There's some circumstances where it can be good, and we'll talk about that later when we get to the spells that synergize with it. The reason I'm bringing it up right now is because later in the game, Sorcerers will get a Metamagic, which will allow them to extend the duration of spells, and this synergizes really well with Blade Ward. You can extend it to 4 turns, where now you're actually getting significant damage reduction from this. So I always take Blade Ward on my Sorcerers as well. These are the big 3, I think, for Sorcerers, and then you get a 4th that you can pick whatever you want. I like taking Friends, just for the out-of-combat utility. Light is a fantastic spell, but in this case, I think I will go for Shocking Grasp, because I don't really need Light as a drow. I have superior dark vision already. I could say many more things about these other cantrips, but please do check out my spell tier list for that. I have a spell tier list on my website where I review every cantrip and spell in the game. The link to my website is in the description. However, I'm also going to link in the description another YouTuber who I think does good spell reviews, and that is Draconic. He's a friend of this channel. I'm a fan of his channel. I think he should be more popular than he is, so please check out his channel if you want a second opinion on what spells and cantrips are good. Okay, now let's go to level 1 spells. Well, there are 2 that I have to talk about. The first one is Chromatic Orb. Chromatic Orb is a ranged attack spell, so it'll function like the attack cantrips where you make an attack roll, you use your charisma modifier on the attack roll. If it hits, it does damage, and it can crit. The thing that makes Chromatic Orb unique is that you get to pick what kind of elemental damage you want it to do, and there are a ton of options. Acid, cold, fire, lightning, thunder. All of them will do 2d8 damage and do some kind of ground effect. All of them except thunder. Thunder just does 3d8 damage and no ground effect. I've listed all of the ground effects and the damage on my review of the spell on my spell tier list, so go to it there. I won't go over it again. But what makes this spell so great is that you can tailor the damage type for your situation with 1 spell learned. So learning this 1 spell is kind of like learning 8 spells for the 8 damage types that you can do. And that's crucial for a sorcerer who needs their spell selections to do a lot, right? You need a lot of flexibility from them. It's a must pick for sorcerers, in my opinion. The other spell we need to talk about, man, I'm so excited to talk about this one too. It's my favorite spell in the game, Sleep. Wow, Sleep. Okay. Sleep puts targets to sleep. Makes sense. Putting targets to sleep is really good, not just because they lose turns. Actually, I prefer to wake them up before they ever lose a turn anyways. No, the big thing about Sleep, a sleeping target, if you attack it within melee range, that attack will automatically hit, and that hit will automatically be converted into a crit. That's right, it's a free crit 100%. And there are other ways in the game to get free 100% crits, but Sleep is the most reliable because Sleep does not have a saving throw. Instead, it functions off of a hit point system, where when you cast it as a level 1 spell, it's going to put to sleep targets up to 24 hit points. And it starts with the lowest hit point target in its area and starts going up. So let's give an example. Imagine there are 3 goblins. One of them has 7 hit points, and the other 2 have 8 hit points. If you cast sleep, it's going to put all 3 to sleep. It'll start with the 7 hit points and go up, but because the 3 of them have a hit point total under 24, it will put them all to sleep. No saving throw, 100% guarantee. And for 2 turns, they'll be sleeping, but I highly recommend you attack them in melee range before those 2 turns are up, because the best part is that free crit. When they have 7 or 8 hit points like these goblins, a crit is just going to kill them. So sleep is a death sentence. If you put them to sleep, there's no saving throw, there's no attack roll, it's just going to crit them and they're dead. It's a guarantee. And guarantees are so hard to come by in this game, which is fundamentally about minimizing chance, and sleep completely eliminates chance. So good. Now you can upcast this, and it will put people to sleep up to 32 hit points. And eventually you're going to reach a point where all the enemies you're facing are above the hit point limit on these spells. But it goes off of current hit points, not max hit points. So if you can hurt them enough to get them below 24 hit points, then you can put them to sleep, and again, it's like a death sentence, guarantee crit. Most of your crits are going to average above 24 damage. If you are a rogue or something like that, you will average even above 32 damage on your crits. And so they're just going to die. Now in tabletop, there is chance involved with sleep, because instead of a flat 24 hit points, you actually roll dice to see how many hit points are affected. I much prefer the way Larian has implemented it, where it is just a static number, because the whole point of the spell for me is that you can count on it. It completely eliminates chance. That's how it is right now. I cast this spell so often. I try to bring multiple people on my team who can use it, and I spam it all the time, guaranteeing crits on my strikers. It's just so good. I've had people try to tell me that I overrate the spell, but they're just wrong. They're just absolutely wrong. I honestly consider it the best spell in the game, and certainly the funnest spell in the game. So just spam it in your runs. Anytime you're thinking to yourself, they're so low hit points, I probably don't need to cast sleep, I'll just hit them anyways. When you think that, that's exactly when you're going to roll 3 1s in a row. Just so as soon as you start thinking it, slap yourself in the face, cast sleep anyways, and just bypass those 1s altogether. So these are the big 2 spells I take pretty much every time on Sorcerers. What other spells can we talk about? Fog Cloud is a fantastic spell. We talked about with the Arcane Trickster. I consider it an S tier spell. It basically guarantees your hide rolls. You can dip into the Fog Cloud, hide on a bonus action, and now you're stealth from enemies. That's actually something Brycon misses in his review of Fog Cloud, because he read my spell tier list, and I mentioned that you can use Fog Cloud to avoid aggro, but he was saying that he had enemies aggroing him in the Fog Cloud. And I am sure, I haven't talked to him about this, but I'm sure that's because he wasn't hiding when he was in it. He was just standing in it, not hidden. You only avoid aggro if you go into it and then hide, but it guarantees your hide because your cones of vision don't penetrate the Fog Cloud. They can't see in there. Yeah, it just has a ton of tactical uses. It's a really strong spell. The problem is, it's only really good in certain fights. And because your spell selection is so low as a sorcerer, you can't really pick spells like that. So save Fog Cloud for your wizard. Gale can cast it. Your sorcerer needs to be hyper-focused on those spells which you cast every fight. And for me, it's Chromatic Orb and Sleep every time. You can also replace Chromatic Orb with Magic Missile if you prefer. Magic Missile is, again, a very reliable source of damage, because I don't think force damage is ever resisted. There's no attack roll on Magic Missile. It always hits. The big difference between Magic Missile and Chromatic Orb is that Magic Missile's damage is lower, and Chromatic Orb can exploit elemental vulnerabilities. There aren't really many things that are vulnerable to force damage. Yeah, I think you get more damage out of Chromatic Orb in general. It also synergizes better with things like Twin Spell, which we'll talk about later. But there are items that boost Magic Missile that really make it an S tier spell. So if you prefer to go Magic Missile over Chromatic Orb, that's another good option. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about level 1 of Sorcerer. So let's go forward to level 2, where it gets its Metamagic feature. Skipping ahead now to level 2, this is when Sorcerers get their Metamagic feature. Now, I can't say Metamagic is the class-defining feature of the Sorcerer. I mean, you gotta say that spells are, right? But there are other full Arcane Caster classes, but none of them get Metamagic. That's kind of what distinguishes the Sorcerer from, other full Arcane Casters like the Wizard. And so while it's not the major feature of the class, it is kind of a class-defining feature in that it distinguishes it. Metamagic functions like a spell version of the Battle Master's maneuvers, right? So if you remember back to the fighter video, for those who watched it, if you haven't watched it, please check it out. It's awesome. The Battle Master fighter got special maneuvers that he can do, and most of these augmented his primary attack. And then he got a resource to fuel those maneuvers, and that was superiority dice. Similarly, Sorcerers are going to get Metamagic powers. And these are added effects that you can tack on, not to your basic attack, but to your spells. And then you get a special resource to fuel them, and that is sorcery points. Different maneuvers are going to cost a different amount of sorcery points, and you get sorcery points equal to your level. Unlike Battlemaster superiority dice, sorcery points refresh every long rest, so this is a long rest dependent class. It's not different than the Wizard in that sense. Alright, let's go over some of these Metamagic powers. You get to choose 2 Metamagic powers from a shortened list at level 2, and then next level 3, you get to choose 1 more Metamagic power from an extended list. So we'll go over the 2 now, and then we'll skip ahead to level 3. Or rather, we'll go over the 4 now and skip ahead to level 3. Alright, first is Careful Spell. Careful Spell, this will augment area of effect spells that require a saving throw. And what it does is if an ally is caught in that area of effect and the spell would otherwise hit them, when you use Careful Spell, which costs 1 sorcery point, they automatically make their saving throw. I guess we'll evaluate these as we go through them, so I'll just say right now, I think Careful Spell is not good right now in early access. And the big reason is just there aren't a lot of spells that really benefit from it right now. One of them, probably the best one, is Thunderwave. Thunderwave does 2d8 thunder damage, and it pushes targets away who fail their saving throw. If you succeed on your saving throw, you take half damage and you aren't pushed. So let's say we use Thunderwave to push away enemies, but we also hit an ally in the area. Your ally automatically makes a saving throw, so he takes half damage and isn't pushed. So it's not that he's completely immune to the spell, he will still take half damage. You get the picture. The other problem that I have with Careful Spell is that it doesn't work right now with spells that have saving throws but have persistent saving throws. Take, for example, the spell Grease, which you can get if you're a Draconic Sorcerer. Grease requires a saving throw every round for the targets that are in it. And right now, the game just doesn't allow you to cast Grease with Careful Spell. And it's too bad, because that really is the most value you're going to get out of a Careful Spell cast is on persistent ground effects like Grease or Entangle. So in my opinion, Careful Spell is just a dud. Don't pick it in early access until they implement it in a way that is useful. Next up is Distance Spell. Distance Spell costs 1 sorcery point, and it increases the range of your spell by 50%, or if it's a melee spell, it gets a range of 9 meters. This one's interesting. To be honest, I haven't played around with it very much. Theoretically, there are some, some cool things that you could do with it. But still, I can't imagine it being insanely impactful unless you could consistently use it to outrange enemies. So if you stayed out of their range of attack, then use Distance Spell to increase your range to hit them, that would be pretty cool. But remember, it does cost a limited resource. With a strategy like that, you would need to be doing this consistently to cancel their turns, right? So I don't expect Distance Spell is very good. I haven't gotten a lot of use out of it in my runs, but then again, like I said, I haven't played around with it that much. If you think it's useful or you've done cool things with it, please let me know in the comments, and I'll take that into consideration when we do the reviews of these classes on full release, right? All right, that's Distance Spell. Next up is Extend Spell. Now this is one I do use often. Extend Spell costs 1 sorcery point, and it doubles the duration of conditions, summons, and surfaces caused by the spell. Now, if these spells require concentration, they still require concentration, and if you lose your concentration, they're going to end regardless of the, extended duration, right? But still, there are some really cool things you can do with this. One interesting thing is to extend sleep. Sleep lasts 2 turns in this game. An extended sleep will last 4. And, of course, enemies can still wake up sleeping targets. So it's only situationally useful. But it is quite useful. I've extended sleep several times and got a lot of value out of it. Another one is Blade Ward. Extended Blade Ward is awesome. Now you're getting 4 rounds of resistance to physical damage, and that's actually quite a bit. But yeah, I like Extend Spell. I usually pick it. And the other one I usually pick is Twin Spell. It modifies spells that are single target, that only target one creature. And at the cost of 1 sorcery point per spell slot used, you can make that single target spell target another creature. And if the spell isn't a projectile like Chromatic Orb, for example, those spells do need to be close together. The 2 big spells, in my opinion, that are worth twinning are Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which you can only get if you go Draconic Sorcerer, which we'll talk about in a bit, or Hold Person. Both of these are devastating twinned. But for a more consistent use, you can just twin Chromatic Orb. It's a good damage projectile spell. Twinning Chromatic Orbs that are either lightning or cold against wet targets it's a lot of damage. And it's a really efficient use of both an action and a sorcery point. So when it comes to picking the first 2 of the kind of contracted Metamagic power list, I usually go with Extend Spell and Twinned. I find that they're the most consistent and the most impactful. Besides Metamagic powers, you can also exchange sorcery points for spell slots, or vice versa. So you can expend 1 spell slot to gain 1 sorcery point. It's a 1-to-1 trade when you are expending spell slots for sorcery points. So we can do that right now. You can see I lost a level 1 spell, and now I have 3 sorcery points. To get that spell slot back, it's going to cost me 2 sorcery points. So it's more efficient to sacrifice spell slots for sorcery points than vice versa. But that means you want your sorcery points to be used in a way that is roughly equivalent to the value of another spell cast. So with Twin Spell, that's easy. You take a single target, you make it double, you're doubling the efficiency of it, so that's like an extra, spell cast. But that's a good way to kind of model the power of these things, is you want them to be adding value to your spell equal to casting another spell. Now let's finish looking at the Metamagic powers. Now we're at level 3, and we get to choose another Metamagic power, and you can see now we have this extended list. There are 3 new powers that are added at level 3. Heighten Spell, Quicken Spell, and Subtle Spell. But of course, you can choose one of the 4 from the short list. So I could choose Careful Spell or Distance Spell, for example, if you prefer them to the new ones. But of course, the new ones that you unlock at level 3 are just better. So that would be unwise to do that, unless you have like a really specific strategy in mind. But let's go through these new powers, starting with Heightened Spell, which is honestly one of my favorites. With Heightened Spell, this costs 3 sorcery points to use, so in early access, that's a very steep price. You use your 3 sorcery points, and it imposes disadvantage on the first saving throw of a spell. The spells you want to use this with are the exact same that I mentioned in Twin Spell, or at least the first 2 I mentioned in Twin Spell. It's Tasha's Hideous Laughter and Hold Person. These are save or suck spells that are so devastating if enemies fail their saving throw. And it can be really difficult to reliably land save spells. But sorcerers can actually do it with Heightened Spell. And really, it's enough to make them truly reliable, like you can count on them. And Heightened Spell for me is the thing that makes sorcerers such good controllers. They don't have the range of spells that wizards have. We'll talk about wizards later, but they have this. They can reliably hit those spells in the fights that you need them. That's Heightened Spell. Next up is Quicken Spell, which is probably the community favorite. I see a lot of people talking about Quicken Spell. This also costs 3 sorcery points to use, and it allows you to cast spells that would normally take an action. You can cast them as a bonus action. And with this, you absolutely can cast 2 spells in a round. In tabletop, they limit you to only 1 spell on your turn, but this in BG3, that limit is out the window. You can cast, for example, and this is the most common way I've used it, you can cast Chromatic Orb, and you know what? Let's just twin it too. You can cast a twin Chromatic Orb, and then you can Quicken Spell and cast another Chromatic Orb on your bonus action. Or you can maybe cast Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and if it misses, you can do a Quicken Spell and cast another Tasha's Hideous Laughter. The possibilities for this are crazy. It allows you to do a lot of spell combos that otherwise wouldn't be possible. It's really fun and really cool. I find that what most people use it for is just the sheer damage. They just start stacking damage spells and do a ton of burst damage all in one round. Yeah, I mean, my evaluation of it is that it's great. Like I was saying, you want these metamagics to be roughly equivalent to a spell cast, and Quicken Spell is equivalent to a spell cast because it's giving you another spell in a round, right? And front-loading on rounds is an important part of the strategy of 5e. You want to it's valuable to do as many things as possible on your round rather than spreading them out over several rounds. You really want to peak, and the Sorcerer is the ultimate, peaking spellcaster because of Quicken Spell. However, you can only pick one of Heightened Spell and Quicken Spell, and I have to say I greatly prefer Heightened Spell over Quicken Spell. To me, it's better. So I actually seldom use Quickened, but if you want, really the difference between them is, do you want your Sorcerer to be a Striker with Quickened, or do you want them to be a Controller with Heightened? I prefer to make them controllers. It seems like many other people prefer strikers, and really it's just a preference. So you do whatever you think is best. Both of these are awesome metamagics. And then the third one is the not as good one. It's Subtle Spell. Subtle Spell only costs 1 sorcery point, but it allows you to cast spells even while you're silenced. Now, it seems like this could be really good, because what's really the ultimate bane of a spellcaster? It's silencing, right? But the silence spell right now in the game is a radius spell, and you can just walk out of it. So I've never had to use Subtle Spell ever. To me, it's a dud. So definitely does not compete with Heightened Spell or Quicken Spell. These are the 2 best. I wish I could take them both, but you have to pick one. And as I said, it's up to you. You do whatever you will think will be the most fun for your runs. And that is all of the metamagics. All that's left now is to talk about my ranking for the Sorcerer base class, except I actually want to give a recommendation on what spells you can select for your Sorcerer, because it's actually really important to Sorcerer builds, the spells that you pick, because you get so few. So I'll just give my recommendations real quick, and to do that we have to skip ahead one more time to level 4. That's when you get all of the spell selections in the game in early access. So let's do that, and then I'll evaluate the class. Now at level 4, we get to pick a cantrip and a final spell for the class. We already discussed cantrips, so I'll leave those. I really just want to talk about what my typical loadout is for Sorcerer spells. And it does vary sometimes depending on if I pick Draconic Sorcerer or Wild Sorcerer, but I can give you a general selection of 5 spells that I recommend. And basically this is them. As I discussed before, I take Chromatic Orb and Sleep at level 1. Sometimes you can get Tasha's Hideous Laughter in here. If you're a Draconic Sorcerer, we'll discuss that in a bit. For level 2 spells, I find Cloud of Daggers and Misty Step to be absolutely crucial. I use both of these spells all the time. They're incredible. Notice though that to get both of these spells by level 3, you will need to replace a level 1 spell with one of these level 2 spells. So at level 2, I just take any level 1 spell I think I might use. Then at level 3, I replace that one with either Misty Step or Cloud of Daggers, and then I select the other at level 3. And then at level 4, I get Hold Person for the reasons we've discussed. Hold Person, incredible with the Sorcerer when they can use either Twinned Spell or Empowered Spell. It just works so well with those. I find with this loadout of spells, I'm able to be useful in most situations. So yeah, I just hope that's helpful for you guys. Now for ranking. I give the Sorcerer an A tier ranking. And really, I wish I could give them an S tier. They really are good. I would say they're high A tier for sure. Really, any class that gets the Wizard's spell list is competing for S tier, I'll just say it that way. However, what really holds a Sorcerer back is they just don't get to use very many of those incredible spells on the Wizard spell list. They only get 5 so far in early access, and it really limits you. So for that reason, A tier instead of S, but they make fantastic controllers, as I've said, probably some of the best controllers in the game right now. So I consider them primarily controllers. Secondarily, Sorcerers are strikers. You can make them primary strikers, as I said, depending on your Metamagic choices. But yeah, they're controller striker classes. They function well in both, but really excel as controllers. They're A tier in those roles for sure. Okay, now here we are back at level 1 character creation, and that's when Sorcerers pick their subclass. Again, we have 2 options in early access, Wild Magic and Draconic Bloodline. Let's start with Draconic Bloodline. When you pick Draconic Bloodline, you get 3 features at level 1. First, you pick a Dragon Ancestor. And right now, what your Dragon Ancestor selection does, mechanically speaking, is give you a bonus spell. And bonus spells are really valuable for a Sorcerer whose main limitation is the amount of spells that they have access to. Right? So you can see the options. There is red, the red Dragon Ancestry, you get Burning Hands. Black, Grease. Blue, Witch Bolt. White, Armor of Agathis. Green, Poison Spray. Oh, sorry, Ray of Sickness. Gold is Disguise Self. Silver is Featherfall. Bronze is Fog Cloud, copper is Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and brass is Sleep. So, there is also, you can see in brackets, a damage type attached to your Dragon Ancestor. And this will affect features that we will get later on full release of the game. but I won't talk about it now. This is just focused on early access. Right now, all you really get from these selections, mechanically speaking, is these bonus spells. Which ones are good? Well, what I really like to look for here is spells, of course, that you will use and use often. And then preferably spells that are not part of the Sorcerer's spell list normally. Spells you otherwise wouldn't get access to. And under those criteria, there are two standout options. The first one is white with Armor of Agathis. Armor of Agathis is an S tier spell that usually only Warlocks get access to. Wizards can get access to it if you find a scroll. But now, with this addition that Larian's added, these bonus spells, white Dragon Ancestry Sorcerers get access to it, and it's really a game changer. Now, I actually haven't played through the game as a white Dragon Ancestry Sorcerer, and I've heard people say in forums that you can't upcast this, and that would be really bad, because Armor of Agathis only starts to get good when you upcast it as a second level spell, or once we get full release, even higher. Now, I haven't tested it. If someone has tested it, please let me know. Yeah, for now, there's an asterisk on this. It should be really good if you can upcast Armor of Agathis. It might, in fact, be the best option if you can upcast Armor of Agathis. But I won't really go into, in depth, why Armor of Agathis is so good. We will save that for the Warlock, because it should be a Warlock exclusive spell. The other big option is Tasha's Hideous Laughter from the Copper Dragon Ancestry. And right now in the game, I think this is the best choice, because for some reason sorcerers don't get access to Tasha's. Wizards do, but sorcerers don't. And Tasha's is just so strong. It's like Sleep, except it requires a saving throw. And that has its advantages and has its disadvantages. The big advantage is you can land Tasha's on targets that aren't below your hit point threshold. 32 for second level, 24 for first. So if you're fighting a target that you need to put down and guarantee those crits, but they have 100 hit points, it's going to be turns before you get to them, you can try rolling the dice on Tasha's Hideous Laughter. They have to make a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, they're down. Attacks against them are guaranteed hits, guaranteed crits, but they also allow the target to re-roll the saving throw to shake the laughter effect. But if they fail the saving throw, you can do another hit too. Where Sleep only guarantees one hit, Tasha's might guarantee 2 or 3 or more. So I like to have both Tasha's and Sleep in my spell list. I use them both all the time. And this is the only way that you can get Tasha's for a sorcerer. I really consider Copper Dragon Ancestry Sorcerer to be the strongest Dragon Ancestry Sorcerer, and probably the strongest Sorcerer build in the game. Is actually probably the strongest Controller build in the game right now. It's such a fantastic build, and I have tested this one. Honorable mentions for these Ancestries. I really like Brass. Brass gives us access to Sleep, which, as I've said, it's not a spell that you couldn't otherwise get, but it is a spell that you absolutely will use all the time. So if you pick Brass, you can change out Sleep for a different spell. For us, let's go Thunderwave. So it is, it's useful for that. And also, I'm just attached to Brass Dragons because in one of the longer tabletop campaigns I played Buridan, a Tempest Cleric, from levels 1 to 7, I think it was, before I left the campaign. And in the very first session, Buridan, I got a Brass Dragon as a pet. It was kind of given to me to babysit, and it really became a party mascot. I named that Brass Dragon Friar Thomas. He was just a baby Brass Dragon, by the way. He wasn't, an adult one or whatever. But Friar Thomas was not only hilarious, he was useful. And so, since I played with Friar Thomas for, so long, I've kind of become attached to brass dragons. The other features that Dragon Ancestry sorcerers get is Draconic Resilience. They get this at level 1. This increases your hit point maximum by 1 for each sorcerer level. So it's kind of like having an extra 2 constitution as far as hit points go. That's nice. More hit points for any class is great. For sorcerers, it's really good because they can be kind of squishy. I consider hit points to be the most important defensive stat in 5th edition. They also get Draconic Resilience. When they aren't wearing armor, their armor class is 13 plus their dexterity modifier. This is the equivalent of casting the mage armor spell, or the equivalent of wearing studded leather armor plus 1. So that's really good. That's pretty good armor class. With a 15 dexterity, your armor class will be 18. That's good for most of the game. I just think of this feature as saving you a spell slot on mage armor. So both of these are useful. They just add a little bit of durability to the Dragon Sorcerer. And that's actually it for the Dragon Sorcerer. All of its features it gets at level 1. So what do I rank the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer? I give it an A tier ranking. Adding an extra spell to the Sorcerer spell list is probably its main feature, and I'm really looking forward to see what more spells we get in further levels after early access. I'm also really looking forward to the bonuses attached to our particular elemental damage type, but right now the extra spell and the extra durability, it's all good. You will use these things. They're not flashy augments, but they are potent augments because of how often you'll use them. So it's an A tier for the Draconic Bloodline. The second and final subclass that is available to us in early access for the Sorcerer is the Wild Mage Sorcerer. And oh my goodness, I love this subclass. It's one of my favorites by far. I've done multiple playthroughs with it. It's one of the reasons why I don't know the Draconic Sorcerer as well as I would like, because every time I roll up a Sorcerer, I just have to make it a Wild Mage. The Wild Mage adds 2 features to the Sorcerer base class, Tides of Chaos and Wild Magic. And we're going to start by looking at Wild Magic because it's the main one. Wild Magic will randomly proc a random effect whenever you cast a spell. So I don't know all of the math of it, but when you cast spells as a Wild Mage, it will roll to see if you trigger a Wild Magic Surge. And if you do, it then rolls again to see which Wild Magic Surge you trigger. And these are crazy effects that are going to occur when you cast these spells that hopefully the important ones will drastically change, either for better or for worse, the outcome of your battle. Let's take a look at some of them. I've made a list of all of the Wild Magic Surges I've encountered in my playthroughs with the Wild Mage. That is on my website, under the Wild Mage in the class tier list. We'll go over there now. Okay, so here we are. Now, I just want to iterate that this is not a comprehensive list as far as I know. These are just the ones that I've personally witnessed, with one exception, and the exception is one that is attested by people on Reddit forums, and I trust them. It seems like the kind of thing, even though I haven't seen it personally, I believe that it is a Wild Magic Surge. Enchant Weapons. This is my favorite one, so I'm glad I start with it. When you proc this Wild Magic Surge, every ally within 9 meters gets their weapon enchanted. And this is a permanent... you can think of it as like a permanent token that's attached to the weapon. Permanent in the sense that the token lasts until you proc it and then it's consumed, okay? So, and what happens when you proc the enchanted weapon is the attack automatically hits and automatically crits on its next attack roll. And then that token is consumed. So this might be a confusing way to say it, but what I'm trying to get here is if a weapon is enchanted with the Enchant Weapon Surge, you can, and you don't attack with it in that encounter, you will keep that token on the weapon. It will stay enchanted until the next time you attack with it, even if the next time you attack with it is 10 long rests later. Okay? But when you attack with it, it's going to consume the token and automatically hit, automatically crit, and do an extra 1d4 force damage. But basically, this is for all of the allies within 9 meters, a free crit and a free hit. That's so good. And remember that this is just occurring on top of a spell you're already casting, so the value you get in one turn from this is insane. It will absolutely decide your fights, especially if you build around it with like feats or builds that value crits, like Great Weapon Master or Rogues. When they get a crit, a guaranteed crit, it's going to end someone's life, right? Fantastic wild shards. I love it when I proc this one. Teleport. Until the end of your next turn, you can teleport 9 meters as a bonus action. This one's okay. You can do some fun things with it, I guess. Mostly it's like an escape, but you never know when you're going to proc it, so you can't rely on it, right? Next one is Summon Mephit. This summons a hostile Mephit adjacent to you. The Mephit is not particularly strong. You should kill it very easily. I seem to recall it having 10 hit points. But what can be good about summoning the Mephit is it's hostile to you and your enemies. So it's possible that the Mephit will draw aggro of one of your enemies and basically waste one of their actions, which is quite good when it happens. The worst case scenario is you just have to kill it, and that's really not that bad. It'll die in one action. So Swap. Okay, this one's also really fun. When you trigger this Magic Surge, for the next few rounds, I can't remember how many, it might be 10, I think? Anyways, for the next few rounds, when you cast a spell or cantrip on a target, you are going to swap places with that target. And if it's an area of effect spell, it's going to choose one of them at random, it seems to me. But it will swap you even on area of effect spells, so keep that in mind as well. Now, this can be bad, but usually it's really good, especially if you take Misty Step, which I recommend. You can do a lot of interesting things where you bonus action Misty Step to a disadvantageous place for your enemies. Then you just cast Chill Touch or Ray of Frost, swap places with them. And now they're somewhere where they don't want to be. Maybe they're up somewhere high and you can pull them off. Maybe they're a melee character and you put them in a very far place away from your team, so it's going to take them an action to get back to you, and you've effectively canceled their action. There's just a lot of fun things you can do with it like that. Next up is the Wild Surge Heal. This, for a certain amount of turns, whenever you cast a spell level 1 or higher, all creatures within 3 meters of you are healed for 1d4 hit points. Not typically very impactful, but can be very impactful if multiple members of your team are down. It allows you to cast spells and bring them back up. It's kind of like a small area of effect healing word that doesn't take any action at all. So when you think of it like that, it's quite good. Fog Cloud. A blinding fog is summoned directly on top of you. It's just like the Fog Cloud spell as far as I can tell, except it's summoned centered on your Wild Mage caster. Again, this I guess can be bad, but I always cast Fog Cloud on myself anyways. If that confuses you, read my spell tier list on my website and I explain why it's good to do that. So every time I proc this, I just consider it a bonus. It's actually pretty good. Blur. Every creature within 9 meters of you, including you, gains the blurred buff, as if the spell Blur was cast on them. I think it lasts 10 rounds. Blur imposes disadvantage on attacks against the blurred target. Usually Blur requires concentration. Obviously, if you proc it with a Wild Surge, it doesn't. So with this, you can stack Blur with other defensive things like Mirror Image. But I mean, really, that's not as big of a deal. Getting the Blur condition is very good. And if you can get all of your allies within 9 meters, then it's really good. If you get all of your enemies within 9 meters, you're in for a bad time. And So I like this one for that. It can be good, it can be bad, depending on your position in a fight. Burning. Every creature within 9 meters of you is lit on fire. That's the burn condition. Burn does 1d4 on the initial proc, and then another 1d4 every time you start your turn for the next 2 rounds. It's not a ton of fire damage. It shouldn't kill anybody. Yeah, I don't know. This one's pretty mediocre, I find. If it hits everyone on my team, which it usually does, it's just kind of meh. They all take some damage. That sucks. If it hits enemies, it's also meh. They take some damage, but it's not that much. You can't really count on it. Oh, it says for 5 turns instead of 2. Usually burning lasts 2, but I have a note here that it lasts 5 for this, so that's a little more damage. Yeah, that's actually quite a bit of damage. That's, what is that, 5d4, 6d4, something like that? That's quite a bit. Sorcery points. This one's only happened to me once. When you proc it, every spell that you cast for the next few rounds returns sorcery points equal to the level of the spell. It's kind of like you get half of that spell level back, right? Because you can exchange 2 sorcery points for every level of spell slot that you want to return, right? So you can cast a lot of spells and you'll get however many spells you cast, you'll get half of those back later. That's typically how I use it. That's good. Yeah, that's pretty... I mean, you can use it just to stash the sorcery points for later. It's good for that too. Turn magic. A random magic effect triggers at the start of each turn. Now, I know I have procced this because I wrote down exactly what it did. But I don't remember proccing this at all. I don't know what happened, but it's completely out of my mind. So I wish I could tell you what it does, other than this short description that I wrote down that was supposed to jog my memory, but absolutely has not. So if any of you have triggered turn magic in your Wild Sorcerer runs, please leave a comment to explain to me what it does, because I'm starting to think I just dreamed this one. And then finally, this one's never happened to me, but I've heard people talk about it on Reddit. The Wild Surge Water, a pool of water summoned directly on top of the caster. And yeah, I'm assuming that it's like the Create Water spell, which again has a positive and a negative to it. It makes you resistant to fire damage, but it also makes you vulnerable to cold and lightning damage. So that is Wild Surges. Let's return to character creation again, and we'll talk about Tides of Chaos. Tides of Chaos is an activatable ability. You choose to activate it anytime you're making a d20 roll, basically. Either attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. And you just gain advantage on that roll. Moreover, it increases the chance of wild magic surges after you use it. Now, this is kind of a nice buff, and theoretically you could save it for important attacks, maybe important spells like Chromatic Orb. If you're upcasting Chromatic Orb, you can upcast it with Tides of Chaos to greatly improve your chances of hitting with it, but I never do that. I pretty much always just use it on the very first chance I get, usually a skill check. Why? Because I love wild magic surges. I don't play this subclass to not get wild magic surges. I want there to be as many wild magic surges as possible. And it's not just for the fun of it, also because the wild surges are really good. As we went through them, you'll notice most of them are supposed to be designed so that they have... It's possibly good, it's possibly bad, depending on the situation. But my experience is that I can consistently turn all of them into a positive effect for my team. Like I was saying, summon a Mephit, it draws aggro. Swap, that can be an absolute game changer. You can disable a unit that way. Blur, I would much rather have Blur because I can choose to use save attacks against blurred enemies, while the AI typically does not. You get the picture. With creativity, you can almost always take the wild magic surges and use them for your own benefit. So I find that 80% of the time, it's just a flat bonus. And whatever bonus you're going to get from from wild surges is going to be better than advantage on an attack roll that you could get by saving Tides of Chaos. So I absolutely recommend spamming Tides of Chaos and just focusing on wild surges as the main benefit of this class. Alright, how do I rank the Wild Magic Sorcerer? It's really hard to rank it because depending on your run, it could be S tier. Like if you're rolling multiple enchant weapon Wild Magic surges in your run, it makes the class S tier easily. However, if you're rolling just a ton of bad Wild Magic surges, maybe like 5 burns in a row, or you just summon a bunch of methods, or you're not rolling Wild Magic surges in the key fights, it could be RP tier. So a class that could be S tier, could be RP tier, depending on the luck, you'd think I would give it a B tier. But again, because of the factor of creativity, that you can react to the Wild Magic surges, whereas the AI cannot, it generally weights it in your favor. And for that reason, I give the Wild Magic Sorcerer an A tier ranking. I still believe the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, especially if you pick the right bloodline, is a better sorcerer overall than the Wild Mage. However, the Wild Mage is just random, right? If you roll the right ones, the Wild Mage is the best class in the game, and I consider it the funnest class in the game. It's one of my personal favorites. So today with the Sorcerer, I think we've given A tier all across the board. A tier to the base class, A tier to both of the subclasses. I consider that a well-designed class. It means both the base class and its subclasses are offering something fun, interesting, and powerful. Please, I highly recommend, do a Sorcerer run. It's insanely fun. Actually, specifically do a Wild Mage Sorcerer run. These are my favorite runs, and some of my favorite moments in the game have been with the Wild Mage Sorcerer. And that's all I have to say about that, so thank you so much for watching, guys. Next week we'll be covering the Warlock, although it might not be next weekend that I release it. I have a lot of traveling I'm doing, visiting family, and I expect that will take the time that I usually have to make these videos. Of course, I'm going to try to release it in the usual time frame, but if it's not out by next weekend, I'm sorry. I will have it out soon after, I'm sure. So stay tuned, and I'll see you then.